All right, here comes a quick review of market equilibrium. Well, basically, market equilibrium is related to demand and supply. So we talked about demand, we talked about supply. Now we're going to put these things together and see how they are going to interact. So the graph we're going to draw is based on the same axes. So we have quantity here, price here. So here's our supply curve. Here's our demand curve. So to find market equilibrium on this graph is pretty straightforward. So that's the point when these two curves intersect. So this point is telling us what equilibrium price is and what equilibrium quantity is. And well, what is true about market equilibrium price is that at this price both quantity demanded and quantity supplied are the same. So this Q asterisk is the same as QS and the same as QD. So that's the main thing about equilibrium price. Next thing is to figure out why are we calling this situation an equilibrium. And the answer is that market forces are going to push any other price towards this one. So imagine a situation when price happens to be lower than this one, P asterisk. So let's say it is as low as P1. Based on this price, we can figure out using these curves that quantity demanded will be that large, right? QD. 1, and quantity supplied at this price is of course smaller, and this is what we call QS1. So there is a mismatch between those two quantities, and that basically represents a shortage. A shortage, which basically means that consumers want more stuff that is being produced by producers. And well, in such situations, we usually and actually always have an upward push on the market price. So that's why we expect this price to keep going up until it gets to the point of equilibrium. So there is no shortage and producers are not encouraged to increase their prices because they can do it. If there is a shortage, consumers are desperate to get this stuff, and sellers actually see their stuff flying off their shelves. So why not to raise prices if you can, if you still can sell your stuff at a higher price? That's the idea here. And if it happens that price is actually higher than the equilibrium price, then we have the opposite situation, but the idea is the same. The price will be pushed towards the equilibrium price. So let's say we have P2. So at this price, quantity demanded is here, QD2, and quantity supplied is here, so QS2. And again, we have a mismatch, but now quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. So we can call it an excess supply. And when you have an excess supply, it means producers are not able to sell all their stuff because consumers are not demanding enough. And that puts a downward pressure on the price. So producers are eager to sell their stuff, so they're lowering their prices, and that push price downward, and it keeps happening until we get to the point where we're at the equilibrium price, where quantity demanded matches quantity supplied, just like we saw in the beginning. All right, so that's the logic of market equilibrium. This is why we call it market equilibrium, because any other price will be pushed towards this P asterisk. So only when we are at exactly this price or at this point here, we can expect to stay there, because we will be moving away from any other price, either up or down, depending where the price is. Okay, so next thing is to talk about how this equilibrium could actually change. Because for any given supply and demand curves, we have a unique equilibrium price. But supply and demand curves could shift, as we saw earlier when we talked about the shift factors. So let's see how things will work out if one of those curves move. And again, we're starting with supply, demand, and let's actually mark them right away, S1, D1. Quantity, price. So given these two supply and demand curves, okay, let me do it a little bit nicer. Yeah, it's not really doing it. Okay, so having these two curves, supply and demand, we have P asterisk 1 and Q asterisk 1. Now imagine that one of those curves shift, and let's say this is demand curve that shows a decrease in demand. Well, actually, let's do an increase. I think I like it better. So increase in demand. So we have a rightward shift here in this curve. So this is where we're going to find the new equilibrium. So quantity, equilibrium quantity will be here. Equilibrium price will be here. Okay, so P asterisk 2. Now, one important thing we need to understand is that when demand curve is shifting, then supply curve stays the same. So if you're looking at this like questions related to this story, then remember, one thing only changes one curve. And a shift in one curve, basically in demand or supply, is not going to do anything to the other curve. So what is changing, like in this case, as demand is increasing, is quantity supplied. Yes, quantity supply will increase due to this adjustment in demand. But supply curve, as you can see, doesn't do anything. So don't fall for this temptation to do something to the supply curve, because I guess in the background of your mind, you're thinking about quantity supply changing. So quantity supply will change, but supply will not in response to change in demand. So remember, quantity Q asterisk 1 is the same as QS1 and the same as QD1, right? And Q2 asterisk is the same as QS2 and the same as D2. All right, so as we have increase in quantity, equilibrium quantity, of course, we have an increase in both quantity demanded and quantity supplied. So, and that's the thing that changes here. So quantity supply is changing along with equilibrium quantity, but supply again doesn't do anything. That's one very important thing. And same thing applies if, let's say, supply is changing. You're shifting the supply curve, so the equilibrium is changing, quantity is changing, so quantity demanded is changing as well, but demand curve doesn't do anything. Okay, so that's how things work here when you have only one change that affects one of the curves. And the good thing about all this story is that we're going to assume that, again, one change only affects one curve. So don't worry about possibilities of one change affecting both the curves. I mean, in real life, you could argue you might find such examples. We're not going to worry about them. So one thing's changing, one curve is moving. But it's possible that more than one thing is happening. So, and we're going to deal with those situations too. So it's possible that both curves are moving. So how things are going to look in this case. Again, you have S1, you have D1, quantity price, and here is an equilibrium price, P asterisk 1 equilibrium quantity, Q asterisk 1. Now imagine that both curves shift in response to two things changing. So another nice thing about this is that one thing only going to affect one curve. So if you have two things happening, well, you can be quite sure that both curves are going to shift. You just have to figure out which change affects which curve and in which way. So let's say we have, I don't know, decrease in supply, right? If I'm drawing this shift, then it means we have a decrease in supply. So decrease goes down, and demand, well, let's say demand increases. So demand goes up or increases. So if I draw it like this, so it's a rightward shift, we're going to find a new equilibrium at this point, right? So let's see what's happening here. So price, new equilibrium price goes up. Equilibrium quantity seems to go up or increases, right? Because we're talking about rightward shift to be exact. And basically this is what's happening here. Now, one thing we want to notice is that price in this case, like we have decrease in supply, increase in demand, definitely goes up. The reason we are so sure is because both shifts in those curves actually keep pushing price up. Like if you look at the effect of increase in demand, so if you trace increase in demand, the price is going up, right? Then you see how change in supply, decrease in supply is going to affect price again. You're going up. So both effects actually work in the same direction. So that's why we're so sure that price definitely goes up. But when it comes to quantities, equilibrium quantity, basically those two changes in supply and demand move in the opposite directions. Let's see if we can notice it on the diagram. So supply shifting rightward, right? So quantity is going to go rightward if it follows demand, but supply curve is shifting leftward, right? So it's pretty clear that it's just because of it we have these two conflicting moves. So whichever one prevails will pretty much decides whether quantity increases or decreases. So as you can see in this case, this increase in demand is a little bit stronger than decrease in supply. So that's why we have this fairly small increase in quantity. But it could have been the other way. So conclusion is that in this situation, we're sure that price goes up, but we are not quite sure what's going to happen to quantity. And basically that's always the case when you're dealing with double shifts in those curves. So if both curves are moving, then you will only know the way one of those parameters will go. So either price or quantity, but not both. One parameter you will know for sure where it's going, and another one you will be like uncertain. Could go either way. All right, so I think that covers the most important stuff about this story. Just one final thing is that make sure you understand and remember those shift factors. So shift factors, we talked about this earlier. Now you have to refresh your understanding of this stuff again. So shift factors for supply and demand. You really have to be good with those to be able to solve those problems related to changes in market equilibrium. Okay, so make sure you have like a list, whatever it takes to memorize and understand how things work there. So like prices of related goods, income, changes in income, changes in inputs, of course, depending whether you're talking about shifts of supply or demand, but it definitely has to be in your heads. All right, so make sure you go back to your notes and revise those shift factors. And then these problems will be fairly easy, because I think this kind of technical stuff which I just covered is fairly straightforward. All right, so I'm stopping here. It didn't take too long, so I hope it helped. I'll talk to you later.